to the Sterling Heights Public Library. My name is Brent, and today we're making chili. Not just any chili, we're making Texas chili. Come on down. So you might notice here that there's no chili powder on our ingredients list. Well, we're going to be using the ingredients that make chili powder. So the main things that go into chili powder are going to be dried chili peppers, garlic, we got some cumin seed here, and some oregano. That's brown sugar. We may or may not need that. It's going to depend a little bit on the balance of the flavors when we're all done. This is what makes up chili powder. One of the defining characteristics of Texas chili is that there's no beans in it, and there's typically no tomato in it at all. You're not going to miss either one of them. So we got some onions here, we got some beef, a little bit of oil to brown the beef. That's really all that goes in it. So step one, we've got to get going on prepping the peppers here. So we got two different kinds of dried chilies. We've got some anchos and we've got some guajillos. You can use pretty much any kind of dried chilies you want, but for the base, we're going to start with something that's fairly mild. You can always add heat. So the first thing we got to do, we got to get the stems and seeds out of these. So our anchos are usually going to be a little on the leathery side. They're not super brittle. And just kind of rip them open, dump the seeds out. We're going to keep the stems and seeds separated. And then we're going to toast the peppers in a hot oven for about 6 or 8 minutes. You can do that in a pan if you want, but we're going to just do it on a sheet tray here. Because after we toast them, we've got to soak them to get them softened up. And why do we use more than one kind of pepper? Well, because different peppers have a little bit different flavor characteristics. So we're going to get a little bit more depth by using a couple of different kinds here. Now, these anchos have a tendency to be kind of short and fat and got a relatively thick wall on them. These guajillos are a little different. These have got a thinner wall on them. They're long, they're lean, they're very thin wall on them. And they're a little bit more delicate a lot of times to work with. You can use New Mexico's, you can use other things, but I like these. There's not as many seeds in these as there are in the anchos either. And your ancho, remember the stuffed peppers we made? The poblano we used in there? An ancho is a poblano that's been allowed to get ripe and red and then dried. So it's the same pepper, but it's got a little bit different preparation on it, and it's got a different name. So we've got those peppers stemmed and seeded. We're going to toss these in the oven. Start with about 6 minutes. And when we can smell those, we'll go ahead and pull them out and soak them. Alright, so these here actually didn't take the full 6 minutes. When you start smelling them, check them. Because these here toasted up nice in just about 3 minutes. I used about a 400-degree oven. I'm going to throw them into a container. We're going to use a blender jar here in this case. There's a few seeds in there, it doesn't really matter. You want to make sure you get all the stems out though. And then we're going to kind of just crush those down a little bit and cover them with nice hot water. Now it doesn't have to be boiling hot. Hot tap water will work. Just want to make sure that we've got those things, enough water in there to cover those. We're going to leave those sit for about 45 minutes until they soften up nice. While we're doing that, we're going to prep some of our other ingredients. So we're going to need about 3 pounds of beef here. Now chuck works really well for this, but this one here happens to be a piece of round tip roast, which I got a good price on. You want something that has a certain amount of fat to it, but not tons and tons. If you got a piece of chuck that's real fatty, you may have to trim some of it off. This here has a little bit of fat around the outside, but it doesn't have a ton of it. So we're going to take this, we're going to cut it into about 1-inch cubes. Basically what we're going to do is a technique on this. It's basically a braise. So we're going to cook it for a long time at low heat. The first thing we got to do is break it down and brown it. So kind of the same way that you would cut vegetables, cut it into slices, cut it into strips, turn it, and then you cut it into cubes. That's how you break that down into chunks. And no, we're not using ground meat today. So I'll go ahead and finish this up and then we'll show you how to brown it. So to brown the meat, we've got a nice big pan here. We're going to go ahead and add probably about a tablespoon of oil. Just let that warm up a little bit for a moment. Started that pan out at about a medium heat. We don't want to bring it to a raging, screaming hot. One thing we're going to do with beef is we want to brown it in batches. We don't want to try and crowd the pan too much. We got about 3 pounds of meat here, and it needs to be spread out a little bit so it's not all completely covering the bottom of the pan. So space it out a little bit. So we're browning our meat in batches. We got the first little bit going here, and we're not crowding the pan too much. We're getting some nice color on it. And then when we got a little bit of color on that first bit, just kind of shove everything over to one side. You don't need to take anything out of there. We're going to add another batch. Keep it going right in there at the same time. Don't crowd your pan too much. Make sure you got some space between pieces. And don't stir it too often when you first get it going there. You just want to get it, that first side, you want to get a couple minutes on that to get some nice color on it. Once that first side is established, then you can give it a little bit of a stir. So while that beef is browning is a good time to do some of your other prep work. So we've already got the chilies toasted and we're soaking those. I went ahead and chopped the garlic. We got about a whole head of garlic here. We've got about 6 or 7 cloves there. We've got 3 nice onions. That comes out to about 4.5 cups. And that cumin, I'm going to go ahead and throw in my mortar and pestle here. Now this is whole seed cumin. You can use ground. There's nothing wrong with ground. But the thing with the whole stuff is that it tends to retain its flavor a little bit better and a little bit longer than the ground. The ground kind of has a tendency to kind of lose some of its oomph over time. So, see, I'm just kind of going in and breaking that up. You'll definitely smell it when you start doing this, because it really starts to release the aromas of the spice. And once that beef's done browning, we'll throw in the onion and the garlic and get our spices going in that at the same time. We're going to hold off on the sugar again until right down towards the end. We may or may not need that. It's just going to depend on whether we need to balance the flavor a little bit. So our peppers have been in here soaking for a while, and you want to make sure that not only are the peppers soft, you want to make sure that that liquid is cooled a little bit. Blending liquids, warm liquids, in a blender jar like this can be very, very tricky. So it's cooled off nicely. It's not room temperature yet, it's still a little warm, so I'm going to put a towel over the top to hold it down good. We're going to puree this down to a liquid, and then we're going to strain it. Yeah, you can see it burp a little bit there. So start it on low, and then bring your temperature, bring it up higher. And this is going to take probably a couple minutes. So in order to get all the skin and stuff out of this, go ahead and run this through a mesh strainer into a good sized bowl, and just kind of use your spatula there to keep it from splashing too much. Scrape it down, and then you're going to use that spatula and give it a stir, and that's going to help to put that liquid down through the strainer while keeping the skins and any stray seeds in the strainer. You don't have to do this step, but I find that it produces a better finished product when you do. Pretty much got all the goodness pushed through the strainer. From there, you just take your spatula and scrape down the outside, and that'll get anything that's clinging to the outside of the strainer. Nice pepper goodness. So our meat's nicely browned at this point, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to add the cumin in. We've got about 2 teaspoons of cumin here. I got about a teaspoon of oregano. I'm going to adjust the seasonings later if I need to, but we're going to start out with that. Got that whole head of chopped garlic here. And the onions. It's about 3 medium to medium large onions. So the onions and garlic have softened nicely. We give it a couple of stirs, and we can really start to smell those spices in there right now. We're going to go ahead and slowly add that pepper puree in there, and make sure you scrape all that goodness out of there and anything off the edge of the bowl so you don't drip, because again, this stuff is very red and it stains. Go ahead and give that a stir through. At this point, we're going to go ahead, turn that heat down to low, put the lid on, and let this simmer for a good while. Now, I haven't added any salt to this yet at all, so it's probably not going to be a terrible idea for me to take a quick taste at this point and just see. Yes, I definitely need some salt. I'll need to check that again down towards the end, but let's start off with about a teaspoon. And see how that is when we check it again a little bit later on. So put the lid on, turn the heat down, and let this go for a while. Check it every so often, give it a stir. If you like a crock pot, this is a great time to transfer it to a crock pot and let it go for, a few hours. Alright, so this has been simmering for about 2 hours now, and the meat has come nice and tender. You can see that we've got a nice mix in there. Went ahead and tasted it just a moment ago here. We're going to need a little bit more salt. Give it probably about another teaspoon. And I am going to add that sugar. I got about a tablespoon of brown sugar here. So that's kind of a matter of personal taste, but when you taste this, if it tastes like it needs to kind of mellow out a little bit, the peppers will mellow a bit as you cook it, but sometimes they still have a little bit of an edge to them. I'm not talking hot, but sometimes they just need a little something to kind of balance them a little bit. So we'll get that stirred through. Give it another taste real quick here. Should be just about right. Yes, exactly. And if you want to, this is optional. Got a nice spoonful of masa here. This is Mexican corn flour. It's not the same thing as cornmeal. But if you needed to in a pinch, you could use cornmeal. You just have to cook it a little longer. It takes a little longer for it to fully hydrate. So Just go ahead and stir that in so there's no lumps. That's why you kind of sprinkle it on top rather than just dump it right in. We'll let that simmer for about another 3-4 minutes. Alright, so ladle a little bit of this right in a bowl here. Now one thing I want to show you here, you want to make sure you simmer this for a good while because you want that meat to be tender. And that right there, you can just break that apart with a fork. You don't need a knife or anything. It's very, very tender at this point. So, give that a little bit more. And then to garnish it, give it a little bit of sour cream here. A sprinkle of cheese. A couple of leaves of cilantro. And some nice slices of fresh jalapeno. Now, this is a fairly mild version. If you want to make it hotter, you absolutely can add cayenne pepper, flake red. If you want to stick with your whole chilies, you can add like an arbol or two into your chili blend. Be careful with that though, because if you've got people on your house that don't like real spicy, another way you can do that is to put some hot sauce on the side and everybody can season it to their own taste. Texas chili. Got a couple of cheese scones here. These will go really well. Tortillas, a couple of biscuits, nice cornbread, just a slice of Italian bread. Any of those things will work great. Nice satisfying dinner on a cold winter night.